Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins. Today I'm talking about The Stand. The miniseries is from 1994 and it was directed by Mick Garris, and then the book was, of course, written by Stephen King. And this was actually published twice. So the first time was in 1978. However, at that time, Stephen King was still a relatively new author, right? Of course, he had the success of Carrie and everything, but still, he was a fairly new author. And so when he originally turned in the manuscript, the book was going to be like over 1,100 pages long. And so they told him that he needed to shorten it. And so he personally went through and decided what scenes to cut and what scenes to keep. And so that is the edition that was published in 1978, was this abridged version. However, come 1990, Stephen King decided that there were enough things he had cut from that he felt were important enough that he wanted to re-release The Stand, but release it the way he originally wanted it to be published. And I'm pretty sure if anyone recommends reading The Stand, they are always talking about the 1990 edition. I could be wrong. Maybe there's people out there who originally read it in the 70s and that's the version they prefer. Comment down below and let me know. But I feel like generally people say like the 1990 full unabridged version of The Stand is the one you should read, and that is the one that I personally read. The edition I have right here, I mean, even though he shortened it, it was still a long book. So this one is 822 pages. And yeah, the edition I read was over 1,100. So it was a lot that was cut out. But I chose to purchase the original first edition just because my Stephen King books are all first editions. And, you know, technically the one from the 90s, there is a first edition 90s book, but I just think it's cooler to have the true first edition of The Stand. Even though if you're going to read The Stand, don't read that one. Read the 1990 version. But yeah, also when I buy these books, I rarely read these physical books I own because one, I buy them after I've read the books and know I like them. And two, I view these more as like collector's items, you know, almost like pieces of art in a sense. And so I'm not going to read from them because I would worry I would damage them or cause them to lose their value in some way, right? And so again, that's why I bought the 70s edition, is because if I ever read The Stand again, I will just get it from the library and not actually read the edition that I own. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off topic here. So to talk about the adaptations, so there have been two adaptations that I'm aware of. So we have the 94 version, which I'm talking about today. And there are quite a few familiar faces in this, but I did want to mention Gary Sinise. He plays Stu, and this was released in May of 1994. And then July of that same year is when Forrest Gump came out, where he plays Lieutenant Dan. But then the second adaptation is from 2020, and this is a like 8 or 10 hour TV show. I forget exactly how long it is, but I find it pretty crazy, like the coincidence that they began working on this in 2019, right in time for it to be released in 2020. Like the coincidence of that is just kind of wild. But I personally have not yet watched the 2020 adaptation. I do want to, I do plan to, and I hope to release a follow-up video sharing my thoughts on that in February. So I'm kind of behind on my videos right now, to be honest, so I haven't had a chance to start watching the show yet, but I'm hoping to get a video for it out sometime in February. It might not be till later in the month, but yeah, I do fully intend to watch that TV show. And the 2020 show has a great cast, so even though people don't say good things about it, I am pretty excited to watch it nonetheless. But yeah, for today's video, I am only talking about the 94 adaptation. And I'm just going to get right into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So the first half of this book documents the outbreak of this virus, which becomes known as Captain Trips. And this book only takes place in the United States. We don't know what's happening in other countries or around the world, but in the United States, this virus kills the majority of the population. And so we just see that as it takes over. And we are also introduced to our main characters, all of whom are immune to the virus. And in both, the virus got out of a military facility and one man made it out of the compound before the gates closed, but he already had the disease, and it is thanks to him that it quickly spread and killed millions. And we see how the country reacts to this virus, like the government denies the virus's existence, and they even have a radio host be murdered for talking about it on live air. And this person is played by Kathy Bates, which was awesome since she also starred in Misery, of course, as well as Dolores Claiborne, which is one of my personal favorites. That book is so fantastic. And so yeah, I thought it was cool that she has this little cameo here. And speaking of cameos, Stephen King King also has a role in this TV show, and he plays a side character who shows up quite a lot and actually has like a fair amount of dialogue. Like he isn't a huge character, but it is more than just a cameo. And so yeah, I just thought it was cool to see him in this. But to now introduce you to our main characters, we have Stu Redman. He was in the town that the guy from the military compound, he was trying to escape, and so he was driving from California over to the East Coast. And in Texas, he crashes his car at a gas station, and this is where Stu was hanging out. And so he and the others that were there are taken to a virus center. And the others, everybody got infected and the others all died, but Stu lives. And before long, all of the staff here at this virus center also die, but not before one of the doctors attempts to shoot Stu. And then we have Franny Goldsmith, who lives in Maine. And in the book, we are introduced to her right as she is telling her boyfriend that she is pregnant. Whereas in the show, we actually don't find out she's pregnant until I think it was in the second episode, but each episode is an hour and a half. So it's like 2 hours into this before we even find out she's pregnant. So at first I was like, are they going to make Stu the father? Like, is she not even pregnant yet? But I think she had been pregnant right from the jump. We, the audience, just didn't find out about it till later. But also in the show, her mom has passed away at this point, but we do see her father and we see the close relationship she has with him, which was true to the book. But yeah, in the book, her mom was still alive and she was a very severe person. However, we hear that one of the reasons she can be so harsh is because she has become hardened since the death of their other child. So they had a son who had died. And the wife, the mom, has just never recovered since this. And I will say Stephen King, like this kind of reminded me of The Dead Zone, where the main character's mother, she goes off the deep end and becomes kind of unlikable. And yet, I feel like Stephen King does a good job we get a feel for these characters. And so even though they act in ways we don't like, you can tell he still has empathy for them, I would say. We see what led her to become like this, And so it's not just she's just like a cold, cruel woman and that's it. No, we hear what happened to her. And so we can kind of understand why she is the way she is, while at the same time still not really liking her. But anyway, yeah, so we see how the mom just doesn't treat Franny very well. But yeah, in the show, she's already dead, so we don't get any of this. And in the show, she doesn't even tell her dad that she's pregnant because that also doesn't come up till later on. But before the virus hits, we are introduced to Harold Lauder, who comes around in the TV show. And in both book and show, he is interested in Franny, but Franny has no interest in him. And so, of course, it's just Franny's luck that once the virus spreads, she and Harold happen to be the only two people miles around that are immune to this virus. And so in both, they get on motorcycles and head up to the virus center thinking that they will have answers there. And in the book, before they leave, Harold writes on a rooftop where he and Franny are going to and what day it is, and he writes their names as a way for anyone who might come by. They can know hey, there's other people alive and we're heading to the virus center. And then throughout the rest of their journey, he keeps leaving signs along the route again. And in case someone sees these signs, they can all meet up at the same place. And there is a man in the book who is guided by Harold's signs, and his name is Larry Underwood. And he's this up-and-coming singer who had been in a bind in LA, and so he flew to his home in New York right before the virus outbreak. And he was a flaky person who we see is plagued by the words of this woman who told him, you ain't no nice guy. And he's one of those people who likes to think of himself as a decent person, but when he looks at the hard truth of who he is, he's actually very cowardly and very selfish. And we also see his mom, because his mom is who he goes to see in New York. And we see, especially in the book, it's a more of a lengthy scene here. And she just really gives it to him, being hey, I know the kind of person you are, Larry. I've accepted it. You're selfish and whatever. And so leading up to the outbreak of the virus, he just has these multiple instances where he's faced with the truth of the kind of person he is. And he eventually teams up with a woman named Nadine Cross, who also, kind of like Larry, is plagued internally with the push and pull of choosing good or evil. And then we have Nick Andrews, who is a deaf mute who gets beat up at the start of the story. And so he is taken to the town's local jailhouse where he befriends the sheriff. And they do end up catching the guys who beat Nick up, but as time goes on, the sheriff gets sick and he puts Nick in charge. And before long, the prisoners contract Captain Trips and they die. However, not before one of them attacks Nick and they mess up Nick's eye so that for the rest of the book, Nick has to wear an eye patch, which was not the case in the TV show. In the show, Nick is played by Lowe, and he might get a black eye, but he never had to wear an eye patch. But Nick, too, is immune, and he eventually teams up with a guy named Tom Cullen, who is simple-minded, but an honest, strong, and decent person. And then there's Mother Abigail, who is over 100 years old, and she's very religious, and she is able to send out psychic signals to other survivors, encouraging them to come where she lives in Nebraska. And by the way, I love how all of the survivors have a bit of The Shining. And in the book, I think it's Glenn Bateman. He's like the, psychological one of the group. And I think it's he who tries to explain how they are getting these telepathic messages. And he claims that telepathy and different powers have always existed, but with different technology, that those powers just lay dormant within us. But now, thanks to the virus knocking out so many people and technology and whatever, these powers have suddenly come to the forefront again. And so that's his theory. And while that's fine for the book to try to explain it in that way, I personally like to think that people who just always had a bit of the shine are just naturally immune to Captain Trips. But to go along with Mother Abigail, who is sending out these positive psychic messages, drawing people to her, we also have Randall Flagg, who is the evil guy here, and he is sending out psychic messages as well. And so everybody is getting both of these, and they're choosing, do I want to follow Mother Abigail, or do I want to follow Randall Flagg? I don't think Randall Flagg ever tells them his name. They just refer to him as like the Dark Man or the Walking Dude, which I thought that one was kind of funny. But anyway, so they're getting both of these messages. And Randall Flagg is interesting because Mother Abigail, she is a human, whereas Randall Flagg is clearly inhuman. And in the book specifically, we hear how he is around for various bad events throughout history, and he's trying to remember, like, when did I even come to be, And he kind of reminded me of Pennywise in this way, because in the book, I don't know about the movies, but in the book, we hear how Pennywise is there at these different horrific, violent events that have taken place in Derry, and he was always there being a part of it. And so Randall Flagg, it's kind of the same. And speaking of it, so I read that in 2024. However, I was too scared to watch the movies. I watched the trailer, and the trailer scared me. So I was like, I can't watch that right now. But I have decided that this summer, I am going to reread it all over again, and then I am going to do a book versus movie for chapter 1 and chapter 2, and I will also watch the miniseries. So I will do that during the summertime since it takes place in summer. It seems fitting. But yeah, I've decided that this year, I will be ready to watch those movies. And I did love the book, so it's one I would want to read a second time anyway. So yeah, you can look forward to my It book versus movie videos later this year. But to talk about some of the people who are drawn to Randall Flagg, first of all, we have Trashcan Man, and he is a guy who is mentally unwell, and he is a pyro who was tormented by people in his hometown, and he also spent time in a mental health facility. And I thought this character was a great example of, there's a quote where it's something like, to those who the world's hands are cruel, the devil's hands are kinder. And I was asking people I know, have you heard this quote? Do you know what the exact quote is? And nobody knew what I was talking about. And then I Googled it. I asked ChatGPT, and no one knows what this quote is from. So I don't think I just made it up on my own. But yeah, comment down below. Isn't there some quote where it's like something about when God's hands are cruel, the devil's hands are kinder, or something about that? Because basically, the reason I'm bringing this up is because Trashcan Man was harassed and made fun of by the people in his town. And so that's one reason he's drawn to Randall Flagg, because he is not being accepted and loved in the world. And so when Randall Flagg starts talking to him and making these promises, and then when he shows up in Vegas, people have been expecting him and they're so happy to see him and they're greeting him. And he feels yes, I made the right choice. These are good people. Finally, I'm being treated well, right? So the devil's hands are kinder here when it comes to Trashcan. But yeah, and he has this reoccurring thing he'll say, which is my life for you, meaning, for Randall Flagg. And he's just totally dedicating himself to this evil entity. And also in the book, I'm pretty sure when he arrives in Vegas and people greet him, I'm pretty sure he also cries, partly I'm sure because of relief, because it's such a journey to get there. By the way, one of the stories that are cut from that version is when he comes across a guy named the Kid who is just sadistic and evil. And so he is with Trashcan for part of the journey, but then it seems that Randall Flagg has the Kid die partway through, so then Trashcan is rid of him. But anyway, yeah, so then when he finally meets the people in Vegas and feels welcome, he's crying too out of gratitude of finally being there and finally feeling like he has found his place in the world. And so yeah, I just found his character so tragic. But then we also have Lloyd, who had been arrested before the virus, and when everyone dies, he is stuck in his cell with no way to get out. Which honestly, I feel like this would be the worst situation. Like, you're immune to the virus, but you're locked in your jail, so now you're just gonna starve to death. Like, that would be absolutely horrible. And in the book, he is about to resort to cannibalism to survive when Randall shows up and he says that he will get Lloyd out if Lloyd vows his service to him, which Lloyd does. And so from here, Lloyd becomes Randall's second-hand man, and in the show we see he was beginning to eat a rat, and that seems to be the lowly moment in his life. Whereas, yeah, in the book, he was going to eat his cellmate. And yeah, again, I feel like Lloyd was already kind of a shady person anyway. And also we see he maybe wasn't the smartest person either. But I do think putting him in this situation where you're stuck in a jail cell about to starve, like, it makes sense that he would be desperate enough to just say that he will go along with this evil person if it gets him out, right? So yeah, I felt like you really felt the dire circumstances that Lloyd was in when he made that deal with Randall Flagg. And there are, of course, many other characters in this story, but I feel like those are the main ones who I will be talking about in this video. So as said, Harold has the hots for Franny. However, the two of them end up meeting up with Stu, and over time, Stu and Franny have feelings for each other. And so they begin a romance, but keep it between themselves because they are worried how Harold will react. However, in the book, Franny keeps a very detailed diary, and she writes about the romance between her and Stu. And she also writes time and time again, just bashing on Harold and how annoying he is. And Harold ends up sneaking and reading her journal. So he knows about the feelings she has for Stu and their relationship. And he also reads all of the negative things she has written about him. And there was so much more tension in the book. For example, with this diary aspect, at one point, way down the road when they're in Colorado, she sees a smudge on her diary and she's like, I don't think that was from me. And so she realizes that Harold must have read this. And so this leads her to end up breaking into Harold's home in Colorado. However, she leaves a shoe print, like in the dirt in the basement. And so Harold realizes that Franny had broken into his home. And so, yeah, there was just so much tension just with that right there. But anyway, so Harold, before they get to Colorado, Franny and Stu have begun a romance. And when they finally do break the news to Harold, he has already read her journal. So he already knows what's going on and he has already prepared himself for this. So when they break it to him, he just seems totally fine. And they're just like, wow, like that was easy. Like that went like better than we could have expected. And it just goes to show you, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is, and they probably should have been a little bit more suspicious. But then another thing that just added so much more tension and suspense to this book is that, like I said, Larry in the book, he follows Harold's signs and he starts to see Harold as like this divine leader. And they even say along the trip when he's with other people, know how there's the phrase, what would Jesus do? They start saying like, what would Harold do? So they see him as, someone very high that they idolize almost. And so when Larry shows up to Colorado, he finds Franny and he tells her like, hey, I want to see Harold. Like he helped guide us on this journey. Like I want to meet the man that I have been looking up to this whole time. And Franny confides in him that like, yeah, Harold, he's changed though. Like, because by the time they get to Colorado, like he just feels different and Franny is worried about what's going on with him. So she tells this to Larry. And then Larry, he eventually does go to see Harold and he sees how Harold just has this vacant, false smile and he seems so amicable and yet there's just something off and unsettling about him. And then also when Larry is in Harold's home, he sees a journal hidden behind like this brick. However, he doesn't actually read it. He just sees that it's there. And within this journal, Harold has written, he's just poured out his soul into this journal. And so yeah, again, there was just so much more suspense. And I just loved reading anything that had to do with Harold, because you were just always like, man, like, what is this guy up to? And yeah, he was just so unsettling. And again, there were just so many suspenseful moments with him. And yeah, I just wish the show had more of these scenes in it. But to talk about Nadine now. So in the show, Nadine is a woman Larry comes across while they are still in New York, and the two of them leave the city together. However, she eventually leaves in the night. She still does make her way to Boulder. She just arrives there with someone else. Whereas in the book, Larry did not meet Nadine in New York, and rather the woman he meets in New York is an older woman named Rita. And so the two of them start this trek leaving the city together. However, this is early on in the story, and Larry is very selfish and cold, and he kind of causes Rita to end up committing suicide. And so this is a turning point in his life. And so by the time he meets Nadine, he's like, I want to be a better person, and I've learned from what happened with Rita, and I'm not going to let that happen with Nadine, right? Like, I'm going to protect these people and I'm going to do right by them. And by the time he arrives in Boulder, he's done a total 180 from the selfish person he once was. And also in the book, when he meets up with Nadine, she is with a young boy named Joe, who kind of has this like feral personality. In part, I mean, he's been through something really traumatic at such a young age. But yeah, so she is with Joe, and she genuinely cares about him and is looking out for him. Whereas in the TV show, she was on her own. But in both book and show, she and Larry have something between them. However, she refuses to have sex with him and chooses to distance herself from him. And over time, this caravan group of Larry's, it grows, and a woman named Lucy ends up joining this group. And then again, Larry and Nadine, like, everybody can tell there's something between them. However, Nadine basically shuts it down, and she's like, no, like, nothing can happen between us. And so over time, Larry begins a relationship with one of these women instead, and her name is Lucy. Whereas in the show, he meets Lucy after Nadine has left him when he is on his way to Boulder, and she is the one with the young boy. But we see that Nadine keeps having dreams about Randall, and we learn that she is a virgin despite being in her 30s, and how she has always felt like there was someone important she was saving herself for. And we also hear, I think it was when she was in college, she has this experience where she walks in a friend's room and they are playing with a planchette, which is kind of like a Ouija board. And they are like, oh, like, let's do it for Nadine. And then the planchette like kind of goes crazy and it's talking about like, Nadine and I will be together forever, and Nadine, and just being obsessed with Nadine. But yeah, we just see how she has always felt like she is saving her body for something very specific. She just doesn't know what. Until she starts getting these visions of Randall Flagg, and she realizes that he is the one she has been waiting for, and that is why she refuses to have sex with Larry, because she knows that if she is not a virgin, she's useless to Randall Flagg. And in both, once she arrives in Boulder, she tries to win Larry back as a way to ensure that she can't go to the dark side, because again, she feels the pull, but she also knows it is wrong. However, when she tries to quote unquote seduce Larry, he is now with Lucy, and he refuses to cheat on her, and he casts Nadine aside. And from here, she communicates with Randall, and he tells her to go to Harold's house. And so the two of them then form a relationship as they plan to sabotage the people of Boulder before then heading to Vegas. And again, they start a relationship. However, they do sexual things. They do everything but the one thing, right? In order to make sure she stays a virgin in that sense. But eventually the people of Boulder, which Boulder is called the Boulder Free Zone. So eventually they form a committee, and they decide that they need to send spies over to Las Vegas, where they know all of the evil people are gathering. And so they choose 3 different people, and each person who becomes a spy, they do not know who else is becoming a spy. And they also leave on different dates. And so they just want them to be as ignorant as possible of who the other spies are, or even if there are other spies, you know? And so one of the people who is nominated, though, is Tom Cullen. And remember, he was simple-minded. And so at first, Nick suggests him. And at first, they're like, what? Like, that's crazy. Like, we can't send him. However, they get more into this in the book, but Tom is capable of being hypnotized. And so Nick is like, he's perfect, because we can hypnotize him and tell him what to say, and he will not deviate from that no matter what happens. And they can also hypnotize him so that when he sees that the moon is full, he will know to leave and head back to Colorado. And so of the spies they send, you know, there's Tom Cullen, but then there is also this older man who was a reverend, and he ends up being killed on his way to Las Vegas. But then the other one is a woman named Dana, and once she arrives in Vegas, she begins a relationship with Lloyd to get information. But Randall knows she is a spy, and he tries to get her to tell him who the other spy is. And she saw Tom Cullen, and so she knows that Tom is the other spy. And she knows that once Randall begins the torture, she won't be able to resist telling him, and so she heroically kills herself in a pretty brutal way in order to keep Tom safe. And Dana doesn't have a ton of screen time in the book or the show, but yeah, she was a fantastic character in the parts that she was in. And yeah, so I just loved the stuff with her. But in both book and movie, pretty early on, once in Boulder, God chastises Mother Abigail for pride, and so she walks into the wild in order to make things right with God. And like, this was fine, but part of me, I was like, man, like, we haven't even seen that much of Mother Abigail, and now she's leaving. So it's fine. It doesn't like ruin the book for me, but it did kind of feel like, wow, like already she's leaving the story. Like, she hasn't even been around that long. But anyway, she has been gone for quite some time when the committee is holding a meeting in Nick's house, and Harold knows about this committee meeting, and so he and Nadine have been working on planting a bomb that will explode in this house when these people are meeting. And in the show, everyone in this meeting feels that there is danger, but in the book, it was just Franny. However, she resists saying anything, but eventually in both, there is also commotion because Mother Abigail returns at this very moment. And so Franny, she then does say, like, we need to get out of this house, but what really saved most people was the fact that they were going outside to see Mother Abigail. However, in both, even though a lot of people are saved from the explosion in both book and show, Nick, unfortunately, is killed. And then from here, Mother Abigail is on her deathbed, and she instructs Stu, Larry, Ralph, and Glenn to go to Vegas with nothing but the clothes on their backs. And Franny is really upset by this because she is very pregnant, and Stu is her live-in boyfriend, her husband, so to speak. And so she's very upset, and she's like, no, like, you cannot ask them to do this. This isn't fair, like, yada, yada, yada. However, she is forced to just accept that this is what has to be done. And in the TV show, she doesn't complain to Abigail there in the moment. It is actually like the explosion knocks her out, and she has a dream that she is talking to Mother Abigail. So it's in a dream sequence where this happens instead. But yeah, in both, she was very upset with this decision, of course, because these men are leaving knowing that it's likely they will never return. And then, yeah, Mother Abigail then dies, and the men head out to Las Vegas. Meanwhile, Harold and Nadine are also making their way to Vegas after the explosion happens. However, Flag, he has Harold's motorcycle crash, and Nadine leaves Harold behind. And Harold eventually shoots himself since he is dying a slow and painful death. But before he dies, he writes, admitting that he was misled. And like I said, I loved reading about Harold. He was one of my favorite characters, not because I liked him, because obviously he's very dislikable in many ways. And yet I just found him to be such a compelling character. And again, you just never knew what he was up to. And so again, that also made me love reading anything that had to do with him. And he was just very well written too. He was a well-written villain. And also maybe kind of like Trashcan, you felt sorry for him too, like the way Franny talked crap about him in her journal and stuff. And so, and also we get more backstory about his sister as well in the book, and how she was like the praised child, and Harold was, he was treated like the redheaded stepchild, And so again, yeah, I felt for him, while at the same time being like, oh, like, this guy is so creepy. He was a weak person at the end of the day, right? And weak people are the ones who are susceptible to Randall Flagg, and that is why Harold, he was misled because he was weak. And so in this final moment, he realizes, like, wow, I did all of this for Randall Flagg, and he thinks Stu is dead. He thinks like all these people died in the committee meeting because they were like away from Boulder when they set off the explosion. So they don't know who died and who survived. But yeah, so he did all of this for Randall Flagg, and yet how did Randall Flagg repay him? By allowing him to die, And so, yeah, I loved his character arc, even though it ends sadly for him. And yeah, I just found him very compelling, and I just loved reading anything that had to do with Harold. But yeah, meanwhile, so Nadine, she has left Harold behind, and she eventually is met by Randall Flagg in the desert. And again, she has been saving herself for him because he wants to impregnate her with his devil spawn. And I guess the woman who he impregnates has to be a virgin, which this kind of reminded me of Rosemary's Baby, where in that scenario, they were saying, like, the woman we use for this, she cannot be a virgin. Like, she has to have had sex before, otherwise this won't work. But anyway, to get back to Randall and Nadine, so she meets him knowing that they're going to have sex. However, when he begins to touch her, she has a change of heart and starts to realize the gigantic mistake she has made, and she tries to get away from him, and she's telling him no, but of course this is all to no avail, and Flag rapes her. And after this, she is pregnant, and she is in a catatonic state, and he brings her back to Vegas, and while there, she's just, like I said, she's just not there mentally. However, she eventually comes around just enough to throw herself over the hotel balcony, killing herself and ending Flag's dream of having his devil baby. And again, along with Harold, Nadine was probably my second favorite character to read about, because again, I just found her so compelling. Like, you know, Larry is torn between good and evil, but I was way more invested in what happened with Nadine and Harold as two people who were torn between good and evil, and yet they were definitely leaning towards the evil side. And yet both of them, by the time it's too late, they realize what a horrible mistake they have made, right? And so both of them have such a sad end, and yet I think it was very fitting. And also Nadine, especially in the book, you know, because she is with Joe, who we later find out his real name, I think, is Leo, but she is with him, and he tries to kill Larry, but Nadine is like, no, like, and Larry is upset about this, but she tells him like, no, like, we need to protect him. Too many people have died. Like, I'm not going to let you kill this child. And so she clearly cares about Joe. And so she clearly is not all bad. And that's what makes her such a great character too. And then also, you know, she has that moment where she doesn't trust herself to make the right choice. And so she's trying to get with Larry because she's like, if we have sex, then I'm no good to Randall and I won't be tempted to go see him, you know? And so that is her last effort to make the right choice. However, you know, by this time, Larry, he's with Lucy now, and he's actually a good person, so he doesn't want to cheat on her. But if Nadine really wanted to ensure she wouldn't go to Randall Flag, she could have just picked anybody in the Boulder free zone and had sex with them, right? Like, Larry wasn't the only guy around. That was the guy she was interested in. But if she really wanted to save herself from Randall, she could have just picked anybody, right? Anybody who was willing to have sex, and I'm sure there would have been somebody. But regardless, like I said, I really liked her character. I found her ending even sadder than Harold's, which also actually part of me, her death also was so fast because it seems like for a while there's suddenly all of these things that are not working out in Randall's favor, including the fact that Nadine has barely gotten pregnant. They have barely showed up in Las Vegas when she then kills herself. And then also with Dana killing herself, and then Tom getting away, and then Trashcan like blowing up the airplanes, which we'll get into. But so it felt like suddenly things were too easily happening not in his favor. And so it made him seem not very powerful because all of these things weren't working out the way he thought they would. So on one hand, I kind of wanted his devil child to be more of a threat, but then she dies so soon that it never really is. But overall, I still liked her story, and I do like that she was strong enough to make the right choice to kill herself. But to get back to the men from Boulder who are heading to Vegas, so when they're on their way, Stu ends up breaking his leg and the others have no choice but to leave him behind. And then as the three of them get closer to Las Vegas, Randall knows that they're coming, and so he has scouts set out, and once they see them arrive, they arrest them and take them into Vegas. And Glenn, they put them all in jail cells, and Glenn they end up shooting pretty early on. And then the other two are put on display, and Randall is going to pull them apart in front of a crowd. However, when this is about to happen, one of the Vegas people speaks out against this, being like, you know, like, what kind of people are we? Like, why are we allowing this to happen right now? And Randall, he then creates like an electric orb that kills this man. And then as they are getting ready for this to happen, to kill Larry and Ralph, Trashcan Man walks up. And to talk about Trashcan for a minute. So in the book, he was in Las Vegas, you know, loving life, and he would go out into the desert on his own and do these solo trips where he would find explosives and weapons. And so after one of these trips in the book, he returns to Las Vegas and he's showing off all of these new toys he has found. And the guys start to kind of rib him, and like, it's like they're not doing it with ill intent. They're just kind of teasing him about being a pyro. But because Trashcan was like harassed in his hometown, what they say, even if they said it in a good-natured way, it triggers this past in him. And so then suddenly he feels like he's not safe with these people and that he can't trust them and that they aren't on his side. And so he causes, Las Vegas had planes with bombs attached, and they were going to fly over Boulder and drop these bombs. But then Trashcan, he has explosives put on these planes, which blow them up. Not only that, but it also kills the only pilots they had. So now even if they got more planes and more explosives, they're like, we don't have anyone else who can even fly a plane right now in Las Vegas, thanks to Trashcan Man. And so Trash, he knows he will be in trouble if he is caught. And so he has left Las Vegas, but he is remorseful and he wants to make things right with Randall because he is still like, my life for you, Randall. And so he's like, you know what? I will make it up to him by finding an atomic bomb, and I'm going to bring that to Las Vegas, and that'll win Randall over again. Whereas in the show, he just hears voices in his head from his past, like people harassing him. So in the show, nobody in real life is saying anything. It's just his own delusions that he thinks he hears these things. And that is why he has these planes explode in the TV show. But yeah, in the TV show, he also goes to find the atomic bomb. And so as they are getting ready to kill Larry and Ralph, Trash comes up with this bomb, and he is all gross looking because his body is being ruined by the nuclear energy. And then as like commotion is happening, Randall in the book, suddenly his clothes, like he just disappears and his clothes just fall to the floor. Whereas in the show, he turns into a crow and flies away. But then the electric orb he had made, it like becomes the hand of God and it touches the bomb, makes the bomb explode, killing everybody in Las Vegas. So talk about a literal deus ex machina, right? Because that's like that phrase. It means when something like too ridiculous happens to save the end, but it literally translates to like the hand of God interfering, right? And so that's literally what happens at the end of The Stand. And initially I was like I didn't know if I liked it, but to be fair, this book, they do talk about God a lot, right? And so I think it does make sense that God does do something in the end, right? Like actively do something. And so for the most part, I think it does work for this story. Like God is almost as much a character as everybody else, right? So it makes sense that God would intervene in this way. And also, you know, Stu, he lives, but Glenn and Larry and Ralph, they also all sacrificed themselves for this too, right? And so they paid the price in that sense and their faith. And also, most of these characters like Glenn and Larry and Nick, none of them believed in God. However, by the end of the story, they all now do have faith in a higher power. But anyway, to get back to Stu. So also, by the way, when the moon was full, Tom ended up leaving Las Vegas, so he made it out before any of this happened. And while he is heading back to Boulder, he comes across Stu. And again, Stu had his leg broken. However, thanks to Kojak, the only living dog, he has been surviving because Kojak has been bringing him food and things. And Kojak was such a great character. And in the book, we even get segments from Kojak's perspective. And part of me thought that he was going to play a bigger role in the end of this. And granted, he was important in helping Stu survive. But yeah, I just loved that he was such a prominent character in a sense. And again, even getting things from his perspective was a really cool touch. But I will say, like, so he is the dog that Glenn came across after the virus. And like most dogs died. And so he's like, wow, like a dog who was immune. And then when they go from the East Coast to Boulder, Kojak follows them. So they're shocked to see when he arrives in Boulder. And they're like, wow, like he made the trek. And then they end up finding a female dog, and they are like, and this is all unique to the book, by the way. So they find a female dog and they're like, wow, we can breed her with Kojak and we'll finally have dogs again. However, when the four of them go to Las Vegas, Kojak comes with them. Like, why would you take that risk in one of the only living dogs dying? Like, you haven't had a chance to breed him with the female dog yet, I don't think. So it seemed like they were taking a big risk and potentially causing the death of one of the only living dogs in America. But regardless, it doesn't matter because Kojak lived anyway. And then, yeah, Tom, who again had been making his way back to Boulder, he comes across Stu, and Stu at this point is very sick, and it kind of seems like he has some sort of strain of Captain Trips, but he thankfully has just enough strength to drive them to a town that has a hotel and a pharmacy. And by the way, in the book, as Tom is making his way before he meets up with Stu, every night he is visited by Nick in a dream, and he doesn't know that Nick has died. But yeah, so Nick's ghost is there guiding along Tom and, you know, providing him with comfort and company. And I just loved this part of the book so much because because Nick was a fantastic character and I love the friendship he and Tom had. And so it was just so sweet to see him come visit Tom even after his death. And in the TV show, we do not see this. However, in both book and show, Nick's ghost does show up when they arrive in this town. And he tells Tom, like, hey, Stu is going to die, and these are the medicines you need to give him, and this is what you need to do in order to make sure he survives. So the TV show does have Ghost Nick in this scene, but they didn't have all of the previous times Nick had visited Tom. But yeah, thanks to the ghost of Nick, Tom is able to help Stu survive, and eventually, long story short, they make it back to Boulder, and Franny has given birth, and there is a scare that the baby would die because it seemed like it had Captain Trips. However, ultimately it pulls through and the movie ends with them looking at the baby, looking at the future of the world. Whereas in the book, it ends like we flash forward in time a bit, and Boulder is getting bigger and bigger, more and more people are arriving. And Franny, she is now pregnant with her second child. This one is Stu's child. And she is telling him like, hey, I'm homesick for Maine, so I think we should make our way back there. And Boulder, like I said, it's also just getting more and more populated. And so yeah, we see that society is just kind of returning to normal in some ways. And then also, like I said, in the TV show, Randall turns into a crow, and I don't think we ever see him again. But in the book, Randall, like I said, he just disappeared out of his clothes. And also with that, I was just like, wait, what? How did he die so quickly? And that seemed too easy too, because suddenly he just disappeared. However, by the end of the book, he has reappeared in some foreign island, and we see that he is back, right? And they couldn't get rid of him that easy. And overall, I loved the character of Randall Flagg in the book. In the movie, this actor was so cheesy, and in general, this movie, it was just very campy and silly at times. However, I will say, seeing the virus take over at the start, we see a crow in every shot. And I liked this since Flagg can turn into a crow. And so people who have read the book, we know that this is Flagg watching over these events happen. Also, I will say with this TV show, I thought the makeup department did a fantastic job. With the virus, how the dead people look, and then with how Trash looks at the end when he is affected by the nuclear power, as well as Flagg. I thought he could look truly creepy at times. So I was impressed with the practical effects. And then yeah, as far as the book goes, I just loved him as a villain, as this superhuman, inhuman villain. And then seeing him reappear in the end too, I just thought that was a perfect way to end this book. Even though that is kind of a downer of an ending, right? Because Randall represents evil. And so it shows how you can never permanently get rid of evil and it's just going to show up again. But I think this is also feeding into some of the other themes the book has going on, which is how by the end of the book, the Boulder Free Zone, which is where all of the good people go, eventually crimes are starting to take place and the citizens are like, hey, we need to have armed officers to look after this place, And so we just see how initially there was peace amongst these people when it was fresh after the virus. However, not peace amongst everybody, but as far as Boulder goes, it was a peaceful place to live. But then once time goes on and more people show up, eventually people just get back into their old ways and bad stuff happens yet again. And so just like Randall reappears and there's no getting rid of evil, same with just human nature and that, this perfect town can't stay so good forever. And eventually, again, people just kind of resort to the way things had been before. And then just some final thoughts. So while, I said Harold and Nadine were my favorite characters, they were my favorite characters to read about. They weren't the ones I liked the most, but again, they were the most compelling. But as far as my favorite characters, the people I did like the most, my favorite person would be Tom Cullen. I thought he was fantastic. And then I would have Nick very close behind because he was also amazing. And then I did like Franny, but Nick and Tom, they were just a great duo. And again, I loved that Ghost Nick would visit Tom. And I also thought the actors in the show did a good job. We have Rob Lowe playing Nick, who of course is just, how can you not like Rob Lowe? Which, fun fact, he was also in Salem's Lot, another Stephen King adaptation, which I have talked about. And it was also a miniseries that came out 10 years after The Stand. But something I did want to mention about Nick is that when he meets Julie Lawry in the book and in the movie, she suggests that they have sex. And in the show, Nick resists. But in the book, they do have sex right there in the middle of the pharmacy. And I didn't even mention Julie Lawry, but she is bad news. And in the book, he has sex with her, even though we can tell she seems weird. And after they have sex is when he's like, okay, like something is wrong with this lady. But in the show, the fact that he resists and he's like, no, I can't. I need to go take care of Tom, who is sick, you know, like it almost made Nick seem like they're trying to make him too good. Like he's too good to have sex with some total stranger in a pharmacy, you know, where in the book, I thought like one, it shows that, again, Stephen King's characters are so good because they're more complex. Like no one is all good or all bad, at least not usually. And so Nick, I mean, I feel like it's understandable that he would be down to have sex with a total stranger considering the virus, right? Like Tom is the first person he has seen in ages. And then Julie Laurie is probably the first woman he's seen in even longer, right? And so I feel like it's very understandable that he would have sex with her. However, in the TV show, yeah, it almost felt like they were making Nick too good a person, being like, oh, he wouldn't stoop that low. And so it almost made him feel less, I don't know, less real, I guess, or something. So that was one. I know that's a minor complaint, but that was a small complaint I had about the TV show as far as Nick goes. But then something about the book specifically that I did not like is that we have multiple times when a man hits a woman who is being hysterical. And in the context of this specific instance that we get, the man seems justified in hitting this woman. And again, this happens multiple times. And so we have Franny's dad who slaps Franny's mom when she's getting hysterical about Franny having an illegitimate child. And so, yeah, the mom is just being ridiculous and just like not thinking straight and kind of freaking out. And so the dad slaps her around. Maybe not slaps her around. I think he slapped her once or something, and it kind of snaps her out of it. And the dad is very likable, right? Whereas the mom isn't. And so it seems like it's condoning what Franny's dad does. And then later with Julie Laurie, she is like messing with Tom in a bad way and making things more stressful. And so Nick like pushes and slaps her. And again, Nick is a very likable guy. Julie Laurie isn't. And so this seems justified that he does this and that there was reasonable cause. And then we have Nadine trying to get Larry to have sex with her. And then he pushes her, like he is physically hurting her in order to stop this from happening. And this too, like we're on Larry's side because we don't want him getting with Nadine. And Nadine is kind of, you know, not always the best person. And so again, it's an instance where Larry is shown to be doing the right thing, and I just didn't like the message this seemed to be sending. And I will say that domestic abuse is something that comes up a lot in Stephen King's books, and for the most part, I mean, it can be hard to read, like in It with Bev and her husband. Like I had to skip over some of those because it was so detailed and so difficult to read, but it made sense in the context of It. Dolores Claiborne, it also like it makes sense in the context of the story. However, this is the first time that he's written it in a way where it seems like he's condoning it, because again, it happens multiple times with men we like hitting hysterical women, and then them slapping them or hitting them works, right? And the woman calms down, or she is no longer a threat now. And so yeah, that just rubbed me the wrong way, and I don't like it. The only time we also see when Franny is telling her boyfriend she is pregnant, she's kind of being too crass for his taste, and so he kind of lightly slaps her. And that's the only time where maybe, you know, in that instance, Franny is the character we like, and so that's the only time where maybe it's shown as being a negative thing on the man's part. But still, it was just happening way too frequently in this book. For my taste. But to get into book versus TV show, so there is no point in dragging this out, the book wins. I much preferred it over the TV show. And it's funny because for the first half of this book, I was like, you know, this is fine. Like, I like this, but I wasn't loving it. And I think it was right around like the 550 page mark when I really became invested. And it was really once people started gathering together, like once they get to Boulder, that is when I thought the story really picked up speed. So in the beginning, as the virus is taking over and as all of these people are just on their separate journeys to the same place, I liked it. And it's also important for things that happen in the second half, for those to be impactful, you had to get the first half, right? And so even though I found the first half less interesting, I realized the importance of it in relation to the second half. And then by the time I finished the book, any issues I had with like the pacing of the first half, it didn't seem to matter, because by the time I finished this book, I was just like, wow, like that was such a great reading experience and I loved it, and so I still gave it 5 stars. However, I have given quite a few Stephen King books 5 stars, and so even though I gave this one 5 stars, it still would not be in like my top 5 Stephen King books. So yeah, even though I'm giving it 5 stars, it has not become my new personal favorite Stephen King book. And I read a Stephen King quote about how he has readers who prefer his books that look more inward, and then the ones who prefer the ones that are more outward. And so The Stand feels like an outward book to me, despite it having like amazing fleshed out characters. But you know, books like Misery or even The Shining, like those ones are the inward books, right? Where we're focused on what is going on within these characters, and it feels so much more raw and personal. And so those are the ones I prefer. Whereas The Stand, it feels like more of an outward, plot-driven book. And again, we do have these fleshed out characters who do have these internal struggles, and yet, yeah, I would say The Stand is more of an outward book. And those Stephen King books I just don't like as much as the inward ones. And I would say I think that's more of an inward book as well. But let me know your thoughts on this down below in the comments. As far as in the quote, he calls them innies and outies, like his books that are innies and his book that are outies. I need to find the exact quote because when I tried to look it up again, I couldn't find it. But it is a quote that I heard referenced on another podcast. But yeah, I don't want to sell The Stand short because it is fantastic. And I'm sure those who have read it multiple times, there's so many layers to it that I'm sure with each reading, you're discovering something new. And so yeah, it is one I would highly recommend. And if you're a fan of Stephen King, of course, The Stand is a must read. Whereas yeah, the TV show, it was fine. I definitely felt like it kind of dragged at times and I was not fully engaged in the story. And again, some of the performances were a bit too campy and too over the top, I guess. And while there were things to like about the show, and it is very faithful, yeah, I just don't think I would ever watch this again unless I was with someone else who had never seen it and they really wanted to watch it, then maybe I would. But I on my own would certainly never feel the need to see it again. And yeah, it just wasn't as suspenseful, or there wasn't as much tension, and yeah, I just wasn't as engaged as I wanted to be. So even though the 2020 show is longer than this, I'm hoping it's more engaging and has better pacing, and I'm feeling hopeful that I'll like it better than the 90s version, because if the 90s version is the better of the two, then that's kind of sad because I wasn't too impressed with the 90s version. I know some people like it, but yeah, I just thought it was fine ultimately. But yeah, so that wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching this book versus TV show video. Do not forget to like and subscribe and share your thoughts down below. And then again, stay tuned for my video about the 2020 adaptation. Again, hopefully that will be out in February, but we will see because I have a lot of videos I want to get out next month. But yeah, thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time. Bye.